गुड इवनिंग एंड अ वेरी वार्म वेलकम टू द ब्लैक होल। आज हमारी गुफ्तगू का उन्वान है अनहर्ड वॉइसेस एक्सप्लोरिंग साइलेंस इन हिस्ट्री। तो तारीख़ की गलियों में ये खामोशी क्यों है, क्या इस खामोशी को सुना या समझा जा सकता है या नहीं, इंटेंडेड है या अनइंटेंडेड है, और ये कि ये तारीख़ पर कैसे असरअंदाज होती है। कुछ इस तरह की गुफ्तगू आज होगी और हमें तारीख़ को बेहतर तौर पे समझने का मौका मिलेगा। वी आर वेरी ग्रेटफुल टू दानियाल खुर्शीद एंड आई एम पर्सनली वेरी हैप्पी टू हैव हिम हियर। Danial is a history enthusiast much before pursuing a bachelor's degree in history from Quaid-i-Azam University. आपकी दीगर दिलचस्पी के जो मौज़ूआत हैं उनमें साइकोलॉजी, जोग्राफिया, पॉलिटिक्स और एजुकेशन सर फहरिस्त हैं। द ब्लैक होल में अब तकरीबन 750 या इससे ज़ायद सेशंस हो चुके हैं और वी आर वेरी प्राउड ऑफ दानियाल के उन्होंने करीबन वो सारे सेशंस अटेंड किए हैं। सो ही इज़ लव्ड बाय एवरीवन हियर। सो लेडीज़ एंड जेंटलमैन, प्लीज़ वेलकम दानियाल खुर्शीद। थैंक यू।
Not yet. Are we live? Last we haven't been told. Okay, so as Naya has already introduced, my name is Daniyal Khurshid. So I will be discussing about silence in history. So normally, actually, when I was first introduced to this topic, my own professor gave me a very good, gave all of us a very good question that. Officially, our history starts at 711, while conventionally we know that our history actually starts from the Indus Valley civilization at 2600 BC. So we were asked that, what can you name any one particular event which happened within those dates? We, of course, all of us try to recollect what could it be, but then at the end it was the battle of Hydaspes, basically the battle of Jhelum in 326 BC between Alexander the Great and Porus. Now, the fact that we were not aware of it, that is what we've been told as the silence in history. Silence in history, as it is omitted. So, in my today's talk will be about silence in history. Why history? Please start the presentation. Okay. Okay, so silence in historical concept, as defined by the Society of American Archivists, is a gap in the historical record resulting from the unintentional or purposeful absence of distortion of documentation. So that's what I just pointed out here. So why is this topic important? Why one should explore this topics? Because as we will go through the presentation and all that and discussions, we will talk about how there are some histories, when some historical events are kept silent, kept in a box and nowhere to be seen. So then it has its consequences, and then can also, in some of the consequences, can be too severe. Which in contemporary times, as of present, you probably have seen it, especially in social media, like in Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and whatsoever. So that's why we should explore. Why I see this topic very important, and why one has to explore this topic. So for this presentation, we will cover about the nature of silence, like how silence itself manifests. Then the silence, how does it affect in marginalized voices? And then how do historians unearth silence histories? and the power dynamics surround, and we understand how silence and power come into play, how power and silence work together hand in hand. And then we will go to the consequences of historical silence, like what I'm just mentioning right now. Then we will come to the how we will how does one confront silences in history, and then to the conclusion. So first, the nature of silence. So silence can, in fact, silence in history can manifest in various ways. Actually, there are many, but for now I'll just focus on four with two subheadings of each. So first we have the individual silence. So this is where with personal experience a fear of repercussions. So individual silence is when the person, him or herself, decides not to talk about a particular historical event or so. For example, if you talk from the personal experience, when I will give a personal, my own account here that, my own, not exactly my own experience, actually my grandfather's experience, which has been, So, basically people do, keeps quiet because it's a bit traumatic. Sometimes they don't want to talk about it and all that. Like it's not like they forgot, they do remember it very well, but they just don't want to talk about it. For example, my grandfather, maternal grandfather, when he migrated here from Jammu and Kashmir to here after the partition. So he has seen a lot of what happened during his migration here, but when my mother or my aunts and uncles try to ask so what did you see over there? He will not discuss it, despite he discuss it. We were only told the story that he went to, they stopped by, they saw this well, to get water and all that. He just looked down and there was a woman who drowned herself down there. So that's why some people don't discuss about it. And in fact, this is not just one case. In fact, when my mom was in Oslo back in 2000s, so she met a Vietnamese lady from Vietnam, and although the Vietnam war is very well documented and all that, still in her family it is not discussed, as they fear that, and in fact both my grandfather and that Vietnamese lady, why the exact reason why they did not discuss this all, share this is that they did not want to pass on the trauma to their children or the grandchildren. They did not want to pass it on. So that's where individual silence happened, where personal experience, like people themselves is silence. And then the fear of repercussions is another reason why people keep silence. Sometimes when they are in oppressive regimes or so, or social stigmas and all that, which we will discuss later. So people do not write it down or talk about it, as they fear that if they do say something about it, like say speak against the regime or speak against status quo or a norm, then they may face repercussions, persecution and all that, persecution and ostracism and all that. So basically being safe, better to be safe than sorry, as it goes. Next we have collective silence, where a group of people opt not to narrate or opt not to discuss the historical events or so, no documentation. So, and two reasons can be shared trauma, like after some traumatic event which affects a whole community and all that, they may consciously and unconsciously agree not to discuss about it. Like as mentioned earlier, if I will just there will be like my granduncles and aunts who also migrated here beside my grandfather. If any of them try to ask what have you witnessed, They will talk about how life was back in Kashmir and all that, but they will never tell about you what happened in the partition and all that. Like again, like no matter if I ask this grand uncle or that grand aunt or this grand uncle or this grand aunt or this grand aunt, this grand uncle, they will never discuss about it. So this is one example, and then for example, I don't when this sometimes it's not just that, and also in communities like. If you go in Kasur, when this Zainab murder case happened, before that, I mean, ever since then we are aware of what's going on in Kasur, but before that, there were child abuse cases that happened over there. Nobody will talk about it. Nobody will talk about it, as again, they will not share the trauma and all that. And then sometimes collective silence is also a result of cultural taboos. Like it is associated, some practice, some stuff are associated with shame and all that, so they will not discuss it. Like, for example, if someone wants to document write about the history of reproductive health in Pakistan and all that, nobody will discuss it as is a taboo subject. And also, not just happens, and not just beside that, there's also Bachabazi, which is like where young adolescent boys are used for entertainment and sexual slavery of sort and all that. So like in Afghanistan, it is a very old practice, not exactly a practice to look up to, very like certain traditions, not exactly, but actually there have been measures taken against it, like during the Taliban regime, it's like a death penalty, and in the Islamic Republic, it is like they made it illegal of this, but laws are hardly enforced. So in Afghanistan it happens, but in Pakistan, it is prevalent, but nobody talks about it. So this is where all that, and then imposed silence. That is when the silence on history is imposed. So one way of it is one form of imposed silence is government suppression, like which in fact here in the black hole it is discussed many times, like through censorship, propaganda, and all that, where inconvenient truths and all that are suppressed, and in fact. Nobody, like the government itself says that we can't talk about it. For example, and now we are acknowledging the 1971 war, but if you look at some old textbooks of Pakistan history, maybe they're still there, but in the old text, but very there in the Pakistan history textbooks, we will talk about what happened in 1968, 1969, and we will have a big jump from 69 to 72. 72. Like no mention of what happened in 1971 and all that, and then it's not just in Pakistan. If you go to in Japan, there will be, despite there are a lot of war crimes committed in China, especially the Nanjing massacre of 1937, there will be little to no mention in Japanese textbooks, which in fact China raised this concern. And then North Korea being already a very close nation, nobody. Nothing comes out of it, so again silence from there as well. So that's the government suppression, where authorities may impose silence on certain topics through censorship, propaganda, or legal restrictions. And then social stigma. Another form of imposed silence is like, although it is out there, you can talk about it, but like social stigma, like if you try to discuss about it, like you may face ostracism and all that, like which include like shame you into silence on that. Like for example, now it is commonly discussed and all that, but initially the comfort women of Korea, they were basically those Korean ladies who were kidnapped and put into slavery and all that by the imperial Japanese soldiers to provide sexual services and all that. So actually, Korea at that time was also, and they're still very conservative on these matters. Conservative, like so these comfort ladies, when they couldn't discuss much about it until discuss what they had to go through and all that, because they may face ostracism and all that, with ostracism and all that, like because of the shame associated with it. And in Afghanistan, as you may notice, some Afghan people, people from Afghanistan, they also have these Russian features as a result of rape and all that. Rape from the Soviet soldiers. So they will also not discuss, because then there will be, the shame associated with it, especially in a conservative society, as they are a conservative society. So like the stigma associated with it. And then then it comes the cultural silence, where culturally, like certain marginalized groups, such as women, indigenous people, and others, may have the experiences, contributions, perspectives omitted or marginalized. For example, in slavery, when people talk about slavery, so more, that is, it is unfortunate. Unfortunate fact, I would say. Like, majority of your historians, they are mostly men. Like his story, I remember his story. Like his story. So he will talk about slavery and all that, but he may in fact forget. Like he did not. Sometimes it doesn't. It's not on purpose. They do it. Sometimes they do discuss it, but they just happen to overlook it or forget about it. So these male historians, when they write about slavery, like the transatlantic slavery and all that, they may forget to include the women experiences in that, because of the because patriarchy and all that. Like they will not go into it, or try to save time and all that. While same thing with women in science. If I ask this question, besides Marie Curie, who other women scientists do you know? Very few people. I think it took Marie Curie at least 2 Nobel Prizes to be remembered. So one is that, and then in the Aboriginal, and then another and then we will go to the erasure of indigenous history. Erasure of first before that marginalized voices. So for example, Aboriginal people from Australia, like they were there before even the white settlers came in, but what happened? They are just pushed aside, and we pushed aside, and history starts from there, when despite they already been there. Same thing with the Aztecs and all that. While same with Maoris and all that. While erasure of indigenous history is basically where these local people, like I just mentioned, Aztecs and Maoris, Native Americans and all that, their history is completely wiped. Not exactly wiped out, but wiped out. So through under colonialism and imperialism, and various as in imperialism and all that, they're we can dictate a much better history and all that. And in fact, as in imperialism, you'll encounter that they used to say these people are uncivilized and all that, not worth looking into it. And so they are the indigenous history is removed, and various methods were included, the Canadians, sorry to upset them, but they had to face the fact. They used to run these residential schools for where they would send all the indigenous people to study there, and even they were not allowed to speak in the local language and all that. Either speak English or speak French, and try to civilize them and all that. So that way they won't be able to document the indigenous history, or they may even look down upon their own people. So why does one choose to be so that's where we have nature's how different histories manifest. So why does one choose to be silent, and is it intentional or unintentional? Well, as we already discussed, why one chooses to be silent, in individual silence, collective silence, and all that. So that's for plenty of reasons they choose to be silent. While is it intentional or unintentional? Most of the times it is intentional, but there are times where it is unintended. Unintended. Yep. So moving forward to silence and marginalized voices. So we will explore how silence has the effect on the marginalized voices, like by silencing the marginalized communities, marginalized communities' history. So we will see some of the effects include the religious and cultural heritage gets suppressed, like during the times of the Soviet Union, the Chechens as religion was pretty much banned in the Soviet Union, even the Orthodox Russian Orthodox people who made up actually majority of the Russian people, even their religion wasn't spared. So as it is, they are not allowed to discuss about. So when they had to do Hafiz the Quran or something, which as they were not allowed to, they get the Quran and all that. So what they would do is they get a piece of, they bring in a piece of paper. People have to memorize it. They will memorize it, and then according to one of my teachers, it was like burned or something like that, kept hidden. So that's how the suppression happens. And as I mentioned, the Native Americans, when you take away their language, take away their recognition and all that, so the Native American history goes nowhere to be seen. And then the marginalized groups, they also get excluded from historical narratives. Like I remember reading about the French Revolution and all that. There were a lot of talks about contributions of Robespierre, René Descartes, Voltaire. Actually, they are from the Renaissance period, but whatever, they're French people. Murat and others. But I hardly encounter any contributions from women revolutionaries. Never encountered the contribution, or beside them like other people. And then by silencing the history, there comes the invisibility power structures, once there was they will in power structures like in governments and all that, you will not see them. That's why sometimes so that's why when the current vice president of the US, I forgot her name, please. Kamala Harris. So when she came, it was a big deal that a woman has become the first vice president, because predominantly it was held by men, predominantly, and all that. So that's where invisibility. So this invisibility, by removing their history and all that, they face difficulties in being in power. You get into power structures and all that. And then by removing the history, you basically normalize the discrimination against these people, as when you're not aware of, when you don't talk about the history. So when you talk about the history, then they will you can just make up any stereotyping racial profiling and all that, and discriminate, like create the alienize them, like basically create make them as the other, as the other. So yep. True society. And then cultural stereotyping, stigmatization, as discussed in normalization, discrimination, as you don't, as one does not, as the marginalized history is a bit silenced and all that. So then you can make any propaganda and stereotype people, especially the Pashtuns and all that. Like the Pashtuns are often stereotyped as always carrying AK-47s and shooting randomly and all that. Or I think there was a previous session here where they once mentioned that be careful when you go out, the Pashtun may kidnap you. Which otherwise is of course not the case. And then when there was actually intergenerational trauma. So when you don't talk, when they don't mention about it, especially the partition. Actually, when there was a documentary screening here 2 days ago, a few days ago, it was about a thin wall. The name of the film was. So they talked about how the descendants of those people from the partition migrants, the migrants of the partition, they had unanswered questions and all that. So like they were unresolved, like they had this, like they were, because their traumas were unresolved and all that. So the trauma became past them, because they would ask questions like how it was, like when they try to dig deeper and all that. Yes. As collect, excuse me. So like they don't find a closure and all that. So it goes on. They don't find it. And then limitation. Finally, we have the limitations of access to resources and opportunities. So when, as I explained, an invisibility in power structure, when they are not mentioned and all that, and they are stereotyped and all that, discriminated and all that. So these marginalized communities, they face or may have access to limited amount of resources and opportunities. Like as I just mentioned, in the United States, Kamala Harris, who became the first U.S. Vice President, woman Vice President. So it must have been a great difficulty for her to make it there, and mostly in the U.S., most of the women or other communities, they make it mostly to Congress representatives at most. Getting them to other positions of power, which some make it, some don't, but mostly very limited. So that's silence and marginalized voices. Next we have unearthing silence histories. Unearthing silence history. I think the slides seem unorganized, but anyways, proceeding anyways. So how do historians unearth silence history? Like how do they try to unearth it? So there are various ways. One is archival research, where they go to the archives and try to look for the whatever is available and take up to. And in fact, sometimes what is not available becomes available. Like the Soviet archives, for example, they were closed for public and all that. Like it's very difficult to get access to it. But under Mikhail Gorbachev, it became open. So when the archives became open and the historians could go in, there was a revisionism in Soviet history and all that. And then that's one way. And then another is oral history, where the historians, they go to various places interview different people, asking about different events and all that. It may be a tough job, but somehow they manage it. For example, when Dr. Tariq wrote his book, Pakistan was an alternative history, he went to various people and conducted interviews and all that, and then he mentioned whatever is on the interviews in his book, and there the subaltern people, their history was documented. And then intersectional analysis is basically how different dimensions of identity like race, gender, class, sexual orientation and disability, how they come into play when in history. So the historians, they can okay, for example, this person, how did he go through it? How did he go through it? And if he and how did this woman go through this whole regime of the Taliban, for example, or etc. etc. And by exploring these complexities, such a dimension is such an aspect of history is covered. And then critical reading and interpretation. Yes, we know that, and in fact, there was a huge argument the last time I gave a lecture here that there are biases in textbooks and all that. But if the historians, as the historians, they're supposed to be equipped with critical reading, which let's hope they do. So whatever limited sources they get, they try to discern okay, even if it is totally biased propaganda or whatever, but there must be some facts from within those contradictory sources. So by that, they take out and then they cover the maybe sometimes the fact that we're not supposed to know. Yeah. And then sometimes the historians, they engage communities to help out and engaging communities to help out, run research projects and share resources, produce knowledge. They work with the very communities, and then they write down what they have to say. They record and spend time with them, record what's going on and all that. And then we have digital humanities. Like now, with thanks to technology and all that, now. Now, these documents, they are digitalized and all that. Like the Timbuktu manuscripts, which actually were kept hidden for some time. They are now being digitally scanned. They are being scanned and all that, and now put on our websites where you can go access them. And in fact, there is access like archive.org and all that, where they have plenty of materials from the past. And then public history and advocacy, again, people come together and document the history and raise awareness about the need to document and all that. In Amritsar, India, there's a partition museum where people whatever was partitioned, documents from the things from the and all that, they bring it to the museum, and so here they exhibit it and all that. So here they document the partition, they document the silenced history and all that. And then decolonizing methodologies, here historians try to take what is away from Orientalist approach in history to indigenous vernacular, the local historians who try to document, Gul Hassan Kalmati, he documented the history of Karachi, for example, and then there are other historians who document the local history of a particular town, a particular community, and all that. So that's how the historians apply methods to silence history. The power dynamics of silence. Now, how does silencing history and power work together? So first and foremost, we have control of information as through censorship and censorship. So by controlling information and changing narratives, changing narratives, changing narratives. Governments, the government, the ruling elite, and so they changed the public perception. They changed the public perception, like according to their needs. Like when, for example, when the Soviet, the Afghan war happened in 1980s, when the Soviet Union came in, so there would be propaganda and all the control of information that the Soviets have come to Afghanistan to take hot water or to spread communism and all that, which is a big threat to Islam and all that. That was the propaganda at that time. Propaganda at that time. Omitting the fact that in fact the Soviet, the Afghan government that time, in fact, themselves requested the Russian government that they need assistance. Like omitting inconvenient truths and all that, otherwise might go and fight. So that's how they shape public perceptions, and then when time needs, they keep changing public historical narratives, where some of them in fact become very false. Become false. So control of information, and then enforcement of silence through censorship and all that. These inconvenient facts, those truths that should not have been spoken, the government or any such institution will do its best to don't talk about it or don't try to talk about it. And if you do talk about it, then we will take action against you, take actions against you and all that. So this way, in fact, many groups got affected from it. Some people, in fact, had to flee from the respective countries due to such censorship and all that. Even during the 1980s, the newspapers would be torn apart or stamped, censored. And then marginalization, exclusion. We already discussed that as when you don't talk, when you exclude these people and all that, then you can reinforce the power hierarchies and continue and perpetuate systematic inequalities, and reinforce, and then affecting societal attitudes and all that. Although we have a 1,000-year history with India, but after we propagate them, calling them our eternal enemy, eternal enemy. So we start to develop a hatred towards India, Hindus, and all that, especially Hindus. That's why we also have a Hindu community in Sindh, but then they are marginalized, alienized, and all that. And then selective remembrance is where in selective remembrance, as they shape the public perception, they shape okay, so this is okay. You will remember this fact or that fact and all that. Not directly, but indirectly they dictate what you can remember and not.
Can I add to the
Yes,
It's
please.
like when they are trying to portray or build a new narrative.
Yes.
So they will just.
Yes.
Yeah. So they will just certain parts which basically suits their narrative
Yes.
to include that
Yes,
and omit whatever goes against that.
Yes. But despite all that, we still see resistance and resistance from. History has also witnessed acts of resistance and subversion against the oppression of people. There are people who still, despite all that, they still they resist and still uncover the truth in history, and try to include the marginalized groups and the other people, the otherwise silenced history. Next, we have consequences of historical silence. Now, when you silence history, what happens? As mentioned, we have distorted historical narratives. Like, sometime, in fact, I remember my professor who was teaching me history of South Asia would tell that, and not just that, but in fact, mentioned that people used to say, in fact, they used to say, oh, in the good old days, back in the good old days when everything was like that, and that when in fact not necessarily the case. In fact, my own professor of history of South Asia said that, in fact, in the previous times, not many people could live up to like 70s or 80s. It was, in fact, considered a big achievement to get there, as they used to have sword fights and all that. And even if one slight cut, as there wasn't any proper medical treatment back then, so you was just pass away from your wounds and all that. So here, distorted historical narratives. Like we have historical narratives which are distorted due to not learning history. And then we have loss of collective memory, like loss of collective memory, where certain experiences, events, and contributions are forgotten or overlooked. Where people don't remember this fact at all. Don't forget, don't talk. Yeah, exactly. And then by silencing history as well, you also face the perpetration of injustice. Like now, as you have silenced the history and all that, and now you also propagated that, made them the other. So then discrimination happens, injustice happens, and all that. Which during the Raj, the British Raj, you have seen that the same rules were made, but depending on who you are treated accordingly. And then impact of identity and belonging, as the marginalized group, they enter into, they have like, because they have made the other here, and that's like this state or the society doesn't own them, so because they get affected. And at times, certain communities, they end up in a, actually, I think in Pakistan you see this very frequent, but you also get into identity crisis, like who are we exactly? Like when we cut off our 1,000-year history with India, and we had to make a new history, new narrative, who we are, new identity. So then we always first we went to we tried going the Persian way, then during the Zia regime we went the Arab way, and now under few years ago we were trying to copy the we tried to trace our origins to the Turkish. Despite the fact that we are the sons and daughters of the soil. And then by silencing history, you also reinforce the power dynamics, like we are superior to you, you're inferior to us. The position, and also the people of authority, they decide this is how history will be remembered. As many times we have encountered this phrase, the victors decide the history. And or sometimes it's not a crime if they won. And then after we have also, by silencing history, we have limitations on understanding limitations on understanding and progress. So by doing so, by omitting parts of history, we have difficulty in understanding understand the complexity process and how this affect our present and the future. Sometimes we make the same mistakes from the past in the present. we make same mistakes and all that. Like history repeats itself, though history doesn't exactly repeat itself. Characteristics of the history repeats itself, not the entire history. Like you repeat the mistakes and all that. Like in 19. Whatever mistakes we made in 1971 war, now we are making the same mistakes in. We are nearly making this, kind of making the same mistakes in Balochistan and all that. And who knows? You push them to the point that they may start asking for separation and all that. But Atom is asking for separation. And then you continue trauma and healing as intergenerational trauma goes on, and so it hinders like getting as we are not, when the closure is not given, so we continue with the trauma. One continues with the trauma, and then healing and reconciliation gets a bit difficult process. In fact, there are also blood revenges here. Sometimes when you don't, sometimes they don't solve it, and it goes on for generations to come. Sometimes fights, sometimes trauma goes far as 100 years ago. So, as a consequence of historical silence. So, at the end, how do we confront silence as individuals? Well, first and foremost, we have to acknowledge the silence. Like, there's a gap in our history. There is a bias in our history. There's an omission in our history. First, and then amplify marginalized voices. Like one has to one has to seek alternative perspectives and try to take a different approach beside the dominant narratives and all that. And try to by doing so, the historians and researchers can promote inclusivity within historical interpretation, and then so these ways document and preserve oral histories. So those who are watching, you can what you can do is you can have as you all have mobile phones and all that, so you can go speak with your parent or go to your any uncle or aunt or granduncle or grandpa or somebody, like and prepare some questions and do a small interviews. That way you're documenting their history. That way they're documenting their history. Document the history. And then support. One can lead the support community researchers and advocacy. Like you can guys form a group and like okay, we will work on this project or that project, documenting people's history and all that, and then raise awareness of the people, raise awareness for these people if they're facing any issues and all that. And then promote inclusive education and public discourse, like in the United States, now they have Black history. They have Black history, so here they include the contributions of people like Afro Americans to the history of United States and all that, and other people of color and all that. And then advocate for, lastly, advocate for structural change, which like advocate for structural change, like now knowing the history and all this, so like push people like education, bring changes in education institutions, cultural organizations, and so to promote diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion within historical scholarship, representation, interpretation, and all that too. Like even in history, we have also issues. So yeah. So coming to the end, after going through this presentation, we come to the following conclusions: that silence exists in history. and not only intentional and unintentional, but it also forced and voluntarily. And then how it affects marginalized voices in numerous ways. And because due to the power dynamics, it makes it difficult for marginalized voices to break free and become a part of the mainstream discourse. The consequence of silence in history are far-reaching. It can result in misled and disillusioned generations with little to no sense of collective identity. When you will step out, when you will be done with this lecture, you will probably encounter someone who may have a different memory to a historical event than the actual people. And then we understand that one has to put effort and raise our voices for the marginalized communities in order to bring their plights to mainstream, helping put an end to the silence surrounding them. So I'd like to thank all of you for your time to come here, especially this short notice and all that, and we can start the Q&A session. Sounds too basic.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Daniyal, right?
Yes.
My name is Sean. And when you just now mentioned about how one way to combat silence is to promote inclusion
Yes.
of those marginalized people into society, like you mentioned Black History Month.
Yes.
There's a thing that kind of rung a bell in my mind. Some people, which is kind of interesting, some people, like especially from the Black community in America, they see Black History Month, when they look into it really deeply, they see that it's kind of a tool, like it looks like they're being included, but at the same time, it's used by the white people, the white portion of society, to impose that history, to make them remember that, oh, they used to be marginalized, they used to be slaves, they used to be this, so they're still like that in a way, kind of like, you know.
Yes, that's a good observation, and thank you for sharing your observation.
Oh yeah, basically I'm from America too.
Yeah.
You can tell from my accent.
It's okay. No. I was even people ask me the very first. Actually, in the most serious conversation, people ask me where you're from.
Yeah.
So that's okay. It happens.
You come here. You come and present often. You come here to present often.
Not often. Used to be, but not often.
'Cause I'm also very interested in history.
Yes.
And learning. I'll discuss more inshallah.
Yes,
I'm working on a
inshallah.
project, but I would like to learn more from you and your perspective too. Inshallah. Oh yes, I'll take your number 2 inshallah.
Inshallah. Yes. And yes.
Okay, thank you, Daniyal. That was a very interesting talk. And I think here in Pakistan and in the subcontinent, there is a lot of this going on.
Yes.
So most of our history, a lot of our history has been written by the British and by Western authors.
Yes.
And so this is, the whole local perspective is missing. Indigenous perspective is missing. So it's almost like the whole history is silent.
Yes.
So it seems overwhelming. How does one sort of begin to change this or to have something different? It almost seems like it's too big a task.
It is too big a task.
To even think about it. So what should one do?
Well, it is a big of a task, and it's not as easy as cake. Well, as I just mentioned, that you can start from the individual level. You don't have to go at the macro level. Just start from the individual level, and then slowly, you can form run a public community-led research and all that, Even when I first heard of Gul Hassan Kalmati, who was documenting history of Karachi, he was just a single individual, yet he was documenting how Karachi was back in before the British were there and all that. He was doing at the individual level. So But as he wrote books and all that, it's in publication, even translated from Sindhi to Urdu to English. So that's his small contribution. So slowly you can take small steps. Take small steps. And government level, well, that is a difficult task. It's a big ask, so I can't comment on that.
Thank you, Daniyal. You are very good. And my advice is that you should not remain silent. You should keep on going.
Yes.
Maybe another 2 or 3 of these. And the issue, a gentleman asking, speaking about the connection with India in Hindus, I would suggest we can always take some Indian historians live online or something like that. So we can get on with them and know better about ourselves and them. And I can give you an example of this journalist from Al Jazeera. She made a film on the way you were speaking about indigenous of Australia and Americans. There's a chapter of history in Spain, the Muslims. The Spanish government has always tried to delete it. And she went on to look for it. And the actual film is In Search of My Roots. And it's something to learn from. She actually found out that there is some connection she has with those Muslims, which were never evicted from Spain. So we as Pakistanis, we need to really get close to Indians, especially on this historical aspect. And I would suggest that you should keep on going.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Daniyal. Loved listening to your talk. And reflecting upon what you said, I am working in academia. And for past 10 years, since I came back after my PhD, I've been advocating qualitative research. Because what we are doing in social sciences mostly is borrowing actually theoretical frameworks from the foreign authors and theorists, and then having quantitative tools to measure the reality if we can. So coming back to this, silence in history, and when you were speaking, I was thinking more of silence in present as well. So the local indigenous stories, the local realities, the local phenomenon have been silenced because we have not been doing qualitative research. And qualitative research is with smaller number of participants. Qualitative research is very localized, very contextualized. I'm working on my postdoc research for peace pedagogy at primary school levels. And believe me, I never felt research this difficult when I'm trying to dig out the local peace narratives. Because you don't have local peace narratives documented anywhere. Thank you. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Thank you, Daniyal, for shedding light on this crucial aspect of historical narratives. Whether it is silence or noise of the history, I think one needs to analyze or interpret it with caution so that we don't misinterpret or reach to wrong conclusion. आपने सर बात की वो इंडियन हिस्टोरियन की, आई वुड लाइक टू ऐड के होपफुली मार्च के पहले वीक में हमारे साथ रामचंद्रा गुहा होंगे, who is an Indian historian, environmentalist, writer and public intellectual, और वो गुफ्तगू करेंगे about bias in history writing, and he will discuss about lessons that we can learn from the Indian subcontinent. तो ये जो हिस्ट्री के ऊपर गुफ्तगू है, ये तसलसल उम्मीद है कि आने वाले दिनों में जारी रहेगा. जो हमें ऑनलाइन देख रहे हैं उनको मैं बस ये कहना चाहूँगा कि दानियाल के इससे पहले भी 3 टॉक्स हो चुकी हैं हिस्ट्री के ऊपर विद टाइटल्स द चिल्ड्रन ऑफ द कोल्ड वार एंड स्पोर्ट्स एंड अनलॉकिंग द पास्ट वाई शुड वन स्टडी हिस्ट्री. तो आप लोग अगर हमारे द ब्लैक होल के यूट्यूब चैनल पे जाएं, इन्हें सर्च करें तो आपको ये गुफ्तगू, ये टॉक्स मिल जाएंगी. आई होप यू विल लर्न एंड यू विल एंजॉय. थैंक यू दानियाल, आपने इतने शॉर्ट नोटिस पे इतनी अच्छी टॉक दी. और ये
It was really a short notice.
आपकी बेस्ट ऑफ लक फॉर योर डिग्री.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you many times again with more talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, yes. Mustafa, do you have any questions?
Currently, no.
Okay. Who knows? Okay, okay. Yes, yes, you're free to ask. We can just talk.
चल रही है. अच्छा जी. अच्छा जी, ये देखिए हिस्ट्री में दिलचस्पी नहीं होती लोगों को, या वेरी फ्यू पीपल फोकस ऑन हिस्ट्री. So even for like you mentioned qualitative research, so the demand for qualitative research is less, limited. So how does one increase? I know. So I'm going to go listen to that talk of yours. How to increase the interest in history. So that's the question in my mind. That for young, especially for young people, how to curiosity, how to nurture curiosity in our past, and how to also history the way it's taught, it can be discouraging because it's a lot of facts, a lot of dates, and so it becomes a burden rather than something interesting. So how to counter that, and how to nurture curiosity. So those are questions, especially in young. If you start young, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old, that's also when the child is absorbing a lot. So those are some questions. So any thoughts that you have that you would like to share?
That's a very difficult question you have asked. For some time I tried getting people interested in history, but it doesn't happen. In fact, it doesn't happen. Well, there are a few ways. In fact, my own professor, who was teaching us medieval history of South Asia from 600 to 1500, what he would do is, yes, we have to remember facts, we have to remember stuff, but then he would just tell us interesting stories from that time. In fact, when I started this course, even I was not interested in that history, but because she used to tell us very interesting stories. Though there were some stories which I got too bored, but even I fell asleep during her class once. But she would tell us very interesting stories. So that way I got like, okay, this is an interesting story. So, like when we were saying about the Tughlaq Empire, we were talking about how Muhammad bin Tughlaq came to power after his father got assassinated. And she told us that it is believed, according to Ibn Battuta's account, that they built this wooden castle and invited the father and the court to have lunch over there and all that, and then released off the elephants and brought the whole castle down. So, by doing these interesting stories within history, you get them engaged. That's one way. The other way is, I normally advise my juniors mostly, like, don't try to read history as something you have to remember try to read it as a bedtime story. Try to read it as a bedtime story. It will totally change how you see it will totally change how you see history. Read it as a bedtime story. And then it's okay if you don't want to deal with history of South Asia. I mean, even I wasn't quite interested in it. But just pick any one which you're interested in. Even the people who study the history of passports or the history of food. There are people who do actually do that. So that's it. And then one way other is like the people, you know, I have been seeing a lot of there have been a lot of memes, which I think Mustafa Hashmi knows more about them. He will explain you. So people will make small jokes like, for example, there was actually there are plenty, so it will be difficult for me to recall. People make jokes and all that. So like there are different ways how to keep history engaging. But asking kids as far as this science is concerned, that is a hard job. In fact, even in my own department of history, very few students are actually there who actually are there to do history. They are mostly there to do CSS. They are there to do CSS. And my own class fellow also back in school who had to study history, they were just doing it because it was compulsory. So that's how. Please.
इस सवाल से रिलेटेड कि नौजवानों में तारीख़ शनासी का शऊर कैसे पैदा किया जाए, इसके अगर हम दो हिस्से कर लें, नंबर एक तारीख़ की अहमियत, नंबर दो उसको उजागर करने के तरीके। अहमियत इसकी इतनी ज़्यादा है कि तारीख़ से नावाकफ़ियत की वजह से वो गलतियाँ जो माजी में हुई हैं वो मुसलसल रिपीट हो रही हैं, because of the lack of knowledge of history, especially in the youth or young generation. आप किसी से भी थोड़ा सा पीछे जाकर पूछ लें तो उसको काज एंड इफ़ेक्ट्स, और आपको मालूम है कि ये सारी दुनिया काज और इफ़ेक्ट्स पे कायम है। और जिस तरह आपने एक प्रोवर्ब की तरफ इशारा किया, हिस्ट्री रिपीट्स इटसेल्फ अगेन एंड अगेन एंड अगेन। अगर माजी को ठीक तरीके से पढ़ा जाए और उसके साइलेंस गैप्स को भी पैदा किया जाए तो उन गलतियों से बचा जा सकता है, इफ़ वी डिज़ायर to avoid those mistakes. And it is one, according to our holy book, the Holy Quran, it is one of the three main sources of knowledge. The other two, history is one of the three main sources of knowledge. The other two are sense experience, SENSE, hissi tajrubat, तमाम साइंस और टेक्नोलॉजी की जो चीज़ें हमें नज़र आ रही हैं, और नंबर 3 इनर एक्सपीरियंस या और रिलीजियस एक्सपीरियंस, द बेस फॉर ऑल God revealed books. So history is one of the three main sources of knowledge. अब दूसरा सवाल ये है कि इसको किस तरीके से रीडेबल बनाया जाए, अंडरस्टैंडेबल बनाया जाए। तो उसका मेरा एक ज़ाती छोटा सा तजुर्बा रहा है। वो नसीम हिजाज़ी की किताबों की किसी ज़माने में हमें लत पड़ गई थी, अगरचे वो नॉवेलिस्टिक फार्म में है, लेकिन उसके साथ वो तारीख़ को इस तरह वो मिक्स किया गया है कि फिर वो रीडेबल भी हो जाता है और जहन में उससे इख्तिलाफ किया जा सकता है कि यहाँ उसका व्यू पॉइंट दुरुस्त है और यहाँ पे दुरुस्त नहीं है, कोई भी उससे इख्तिलाफ कर सकता है। लेकिन वो तरीका बड़ा खूबसूरत है जब आप उसको नावल शेप में ले आएँ तो फिर, और आपको मालूम है कि किसी वक्त में पाकिस्तान में अगरचे वो उस वक्त की ज़रूरत थी 80s की, फिर आखिरी चट्टान और शाहीन जैसी किताबों पे ड्रामे भी बन गए थे और बहुत ही खूबसूरत बने थे। तो तालीमी इदारों में आपकी पॉलिटिक्स की सारी बुनियाद हिस्ट्री पर है। इसको आप पॉलिटिक्स की बजाय पॉलिटिकल हिस्ट्री कहें। जो आपकी ज्योग्राफी की अंडरस्टैंडिंग की सारी बुनियाद हिस्ट्री पर है कि किस तरह ये कौमें इकट्ठी थीं, किस तरह डिवाइड हो गई, व्हाट वर द रीजंस। अगर तारीख़ को सही तरीके से न समझा जाए तो इसी तरह के ब्लंडर्स होते रहेंगे जिसको हम रोज़मर्रा के मुशाहिदे में देखते हैं। सो इट इज़ वन ऑफ द 3 मेन सोर्सेज ऑफ नॉलेज, और उसको समझने का तरीका ये है कि नए लोग सामने आएँ और नए हक़ाइक़ को नॉवेलिस्टिक फॉर्म में इस तरीके से कि वो बहुत ज़्यादा वो इरिटेटिव भी ना हो, لیکن لوگوں تک پیغام پہ نوجوان نسل تک تاریخ کا پیغام پہنچانا فرض عین ہے, بہت زیادہ ضروری ہے. تاریخ کو سمجھے بغیر ہم یہی غلطیاں مسلسل کرتے جائیں گے جس طرح کہ اب بھی ہم کر رہے ہیں. تھینک یو ویری مچ.
I heard the words reading. I heard the words understanding. I did not hear the word جو آخر میں آپ نے بات کی پلیز بنے اور موویز بنی. مجھے یہ لگتا ہے, اور صرف اس مقصد کے لیے میں نے کینیڈا سے جا کے نان فکشن فلم میکنگ کا کورس کیا پورا, کہ یہ جو جنریشن ہے یہ ٹیکسٹ سے زیادہ ویژول پہ ڈپینڈ کرتی ہے. آئی ووڈ سجیسٹ ایز ویل, آپ اتنا ان ڈیپتھ اس کو سمجھ رہے ہیں, سیکھ رہے ہیں, تھنک اباؤٹ اٹ ہاؤ یو کین میک ہسٹری بی ویژولائزڈ. ٹھیک ہے, مجھے پاپولیشن ایجوکیشن پڑھانا ہوتا تھا تو میرے لیے بڑا مشکل ہوتا تھا پوری ہسٹری کو دکھانا. اینڈ دین آئی فاؤنڈ اے ویب سائٹ جس نے 3 منٹ کی اینیمیشن میں ہاؤ پاپولیشن ڈیولپڈ ان آل کانٹیننٹس, 3 منٹ کی اینیمیشن میں اس نے یہ سارا کچھ دکھایا. اینڈ دین پیپل ور ریڈی ٹو ٹاک اباؤٹ اٹ. لیکن اگر میں وہ 1 گھنٹے کا لیکچر دیتی یا ان کو ایک لمبا سے ٹیکسٹ دیتی پڑھنے کے لیے, تو نو بڈی واز ولنگ ٹو ریڈ اٹ اینڈ دین ٹاک اباؤٹ اٹ. تو اس کو ویژولائز کیسے کیا جا سکتا ہے, اس کو امیجری میں کیسے کنورٹ کیا جا سکتا ہے, اینڈ لاسٹ بٹ ناٹ دا لیسٹ از گیمیفیکیشن.
How to make history a game? That's a good question.
So these are the things جو آپ نیکسٹ جنریشن کے لیے سوچ سکتے ہیں کہ اگر ان کو اس میں انٹرسٹ پیدا کرنا ہے اور ان کو ہوک اپ کرنا ہے تو وہ کیسے کرنا ہے. So think about it.
Thank you for your suggestion. I will look into it. I will be really looking into it.
اور اس کے لیے بہترین مواد الجزیرہ انگلش چینل پہ موجود ہے. انہوں نے ڈاکومنٹریز بنائی ہوئی ہیں لائنس کے نام سے, اور مین اینڈ پاور, تو اس طرح کی کچھ مختلف سیریز ہیں, اور دے ہیو ڈن ونڈرفلی. یہ بالخصوص اس زمانے میں جب سعودی عرب اور کویت قطر کا کلیش چل رہا تھا اور ایک گمان تھا کہ الجزیرہ کو بند کر دیا جائے گا, انہوں نے ساری چیزیں ریلیز کر دی. الجزیرہ بھی بچ گیا اور حقائق بھی ریلیز ہو گئے. They have done a wonderful job in this regard.
Imagine. Yes, yes.